Hello 8th grade, this is video 3 of 8.4 notes, the second half of lesson 8.4. We're going to start by looking at example 3 here, and if you remember me stating in a previous video that for this lesson we're not doing the graphing from the textbook because those don't really have the symmetry and the shapes that we're aiming for this lesson. So instead, for example 3, I've created this equation here. And before we get started, I want to recall a note that we talked about. And here it is there. So just like in lessons 8.1 and 8.2, you want to factor whenever you can. In our first two examples for this lesson, we didn't have to do any factoring unless it was to find the vertical asymptotes in the denominator. But what you'll notice that's different about this problem is we can actually factor the numerator. And if we do that in the first step, we're going to have a lot less work when it comes to our graphing. So we're going to factor the numerator. Factors of -5 that add to 4 would be 5 and -1. And now we'll notice that we have a common factor in the numerator and the denominator that cancel out, and all we're left with is x minus 1. This turns into a linear equation. Okay. When we start with a rational function, we know that there's going to be some restrictions, whether it's a vertical asymptote, horizontal asymptote, or both. So now that we've simplified our equation and we've gotten excited because now all we have to do is graph a line, there is going to be that piece of, well, there is a restriction somewhere. So if we think about the vertical asymptote, x plus 5, when we set that equal to 0, then that means our asymptote's going to be at -5. But we just said that our our graph is actually going to turn into a line. So when we sketch our asymptote and draw our line, this is where we're going to end up with a hole in the graph. Okay, as for your horizontal asymptotes, the degree of the numerator is bigger than the degree of the denominator, so there will not be any horizontal asymptotes. Okay, another connection I want you to make before we look at the graph, the vertical asymptote is going to be the factor that cancels out when we create our line. Okay, so let's take a look at the graph. So I start by sketching my asymptote at x equals -5. And then when I graph my line, I start at -1 for my y-intercept, rise 1, run 1, plot as many as I can. And then I'm actually going to work backwards with my slope as well and draw a nice open circle at -5. Okay, so anytime you see a numerator that is factorable, you want to factor it, because that's a big indicator that you will be able to cancel out terms, have a much simpler graph to draw, and you'll just end up with a hole in the graph.